Uh, we're going to dive right into a little bit of text from this book that we have written, and if you miss the beginning, you won't get the end. So I hope you can pay attention. Um, we are we are woven from the strands of others. We are woven from the strands of others. There is a word for stealing the biomaterial of another living being. There is a word for stealing the biomaterial of another living being, erasing the memories stored in it, and repurposing it to store your own genetic code. I'll read it again so that all of us can follow because there is a lot of noise here. Um, we are woven from the strands of others. There is a word for stealing the biomaterial of another living being, erasing the memories stored in it, and repurposing it to store your own genetic code. It's called eating.
So this was an excerpt from our upcoming book, from the Maya shared narrative universe. Uh, we started building this universe 3 years ago, and started and decided to build this across all the media platforms we have been playing in. So the Maya universe has novels, has films, has games, has video games, graphic novels, long form video narratives. But we started building these because after everything that we did, there were a few questions that still went unanswered. And we sat down one day and said, let's try and answer those questions. Let's articulate what we are doing, why we are trying to do what we do, and answer those questions. The first question was, of course, the most existential question of all. Does any of this have any impact? We come here, we read, we write, we make cinema, we make films, we make games. Does it move the needle of civilization even a little bit? And that question was an existential question for us as artists to answer. And when we started answering the question, we came across a few very interesting insights. Okay, I'll start the story from my childhood. I heard the story, and the story had me in rapt attention. Someone told me that there was a bad, bad man in the land far, far away. And that bad, bad man had weapons bigger than ones we had ever seen, weapons that could destroy the whole world if that man pleased. And for civilization to succeed, that man must be taken down. The storyteller was George Bush, and he was talking about the WMDs in Iraq, mobilizing all of us for a war on terror. The war was fought, millions of people suffered, and no WMDs were ever found.
And on to counter that negative impact of story that we have experienced firsthand, we started seeking examples of whether there are quantifiable, measurable moments, which are not just qualitative research and just not based on a feeling of what stories are, but if we can quantify impact of story. And we found many. There is, of course, but I'm going to give you a qualitative example here. 29-year-old uh, scientist launched the Mars mission, sitting in NASA control room. And when she was finally asked, Dr. Swati Mohan said that when she was a 9-year-old girl in Chhattisgarh, she saw Star Trek. And it was because she saw this magnificent worldview that there is such a thing as humans traveling to space and expanding the horizon of humanity into outer space, waking up the universe at the age of 9, that she decided to become an astronaut and eventually became the leader of the Mars mission. So we know that there is, I mean, these are just, of course, some examples of how stories impact our lives, and stories inform policy, stories inform the way we believe and behave at scale. The question we then asked ourselves was, why are stories so significantly powerful? And we wondered if that is a social function, or there is something far deeper hardwired in us, uh, that make us so responsive to storytelling. Uh,
Are we special as
are we
a
special as a species?
Yeah, are stories something that are unique to only humans, only educated humans, or are stories something far more primal? And that took us to the University of Colorado.
The scientists of Colorado University were looking at this species of bird called the barn swallow. The barn swallow is a little bigger than a sparrow kind of a bird, and it has a reddish brown chest. It has a maroonish chest. So its chest feathers are maroon. Now the reason for the chest feathers being maroon are quite physiological. The chest feathers are only a consequence of the blood's ability to metabolize oxygen. But here's what they found. The scientists of Colorado University discovered that the barn swallow is a socially monogamous species. It it's a species that nests together. If females and males, once they meet, they nest together. They produce children. They produce progeny, and they kind of more or less live together for the rest of their lives. They are a socially monogamous species.
Socially monogamous is the important word there.
Because the scientists also found that there are a lot of females who are cheating on the sly, who are having these outside relationships outside of their monogamous relationships, and the males were raising children who were not their own, and the males had no idea this was going on.
And they found a correlation. They found that the males that were being cheated upon were somehow paler than the males that were cheated on.
So the males who were being scorned by their female partners were being rejected because their chest feathers were not maroon enough, were not saturated enough. And invariably, all the Romeos who were getting a lot of action had very saturated maroon feathers. That was a singular distinction that the scientists discovered as a pattern. So they extended the experiment, and they took $1 felt tip marker, like a one red felt tip marker. They rounded up all the guys who were rejected, who were not getting any action from their female partners, and rubbed this red felt tip marker on their feathers. And voila, they were instant hits with the ladies. Right after that cosmetic hack, they were immediately having all the sex they needed with their female partners, and they were raising their children, and they were raising their own DNA.
Now, if any male barn swallow had figured this out, they would be a barn swallow billionaire. But the question I want to ask all of you is, are similar behaviors prevalent in humans? Are there these felt tip markers that we as barn swallows employ at scale to hack certain behaviors?
And when you start looking at it from that perspective, you realize that a large part of human enterprise, a large percentage of all human industry has been about this idea, has been developed around the idea of finding hacks that can be sold to one group of people that they can deploy to hack the behavior of another group of people. Now just think about barn swallows, right? Like again, in that example, if you had one barn swallow who figured out this simple fact that you can have a red felt tip marker, rub the felt tip marker on males who are not getting sufficient action, and the moment you do that, you will start being able to hack the behavior of females who are only biologically looking for best genes. Now, the females of barn swallow did not have to go to a biology school, did not have to go to a science school to study that better better red feathers means better metabolical capacity and better disease fighting capacity of the body. But evolution trained them to behave like that. Similarly, evolution has hardwired behaviors in us that we may not be consciously aware of, but are easily hackable by just changing the surface, by just changing the cosmetic.
And we have a term for that. We call it junk food. And today we are going to push the analogy a little forward by talking to you about junk culture. How many of you enjoy sugar? Show of hands. Great. How many of you know sugar is not good for you? But we still enjoy it. We evolved in very different environments. We evolved in environments where sugar or carbohydrates were not freely available. So our body created an if-then algorithm that said, if carbs, then good. So our body rewarded us in consuming carbs, never knowing that there could possibly be a day where there could be 1,500 calories in a single bite of cheesecake. That possibility never existed. So now our brain keeps saying, if sugar, then good, to a point that we die of sugar overdose. Similarly, there are cultural artifacts that our body responds to very, very well. Artifacts of
And these are cosmetic. These are just like the felt tip marker or sugar. We don't need to necessarily be aware why they are working upon us, but they're working upon us all the time. These are ideas, concepts, narratives that keep working upon us all the time because they were relevant for our sustenance and survival in forest and savanna environments. In environments of profound scarcity, it was very important to learn how to distrust the other, how to look at the other with a sense of distrust, because they may come and take away your food or your mating resources. Now, this behavior is so hardwired in us, just like the barn swallow's behavior is hardwired in the barn swallow, that somebody can come with a cosmetic marker, just a felt tip marker, a narrative that this group of people is going to come and take away your jobs. This group of people is going to come and take away the mating resources, the women and marry everyone. And this group of people is going to take away your opportunity to live and prosper. And you would immediately, we are very, very vulnerable to these felt tip markers, just like the barn swallow is vulnerable to the red felt tip marker. We are very, very vulnerable to these cosmetic hacks.
Even when it comes to stories, there are ideas that we fall prey for very easily. The idea of what Anand was talking about, othering your neighbor, of creating films, stories of war, stories of conflict, stories of uh, pornographic content. These are felt tip markers. These are peak shifts of our most primal instincts.
This is these are cheesecakes. These are sugar driven, sugar laden, diabetes inducing cheesecakes of culture that we are extremely vulnerable to. So while we spend the last 2 decades of our lives figuring out this incredible distinction, that while sugar was useful in the scarcity of forest and savanna environment, in the abundance of modern environments, this very sugar is extremely bad for us because the body stores it thinking that it's never going to have another meal so that it can use up the energy. Similarly, our body rewards lessons of anxiety, lessons of warnings, lessons of greed, lessons of storing possibilities of being able to live in a forest and savanna environment, which in this environment is extremely diabetic for our culture. And we realize that
The biggest story, the one such story that is the most prevalent story, a story that we all take as the most primary, most fundamental story, is the story of good versus evil. That there is a fine line between good people and bad people, and all of us fall on the side of good people. There's no person in the world who identifies as the villain. This idea of a story of good versus evil is an absolute lie that's been told to us, because the real world stakes, real world choices are far more complex, far more invisible. And that's a story, that's a myth, that's a unit of junk culture that we wanted to break.
And that's when we started thinking of how junk culture, junk food was countered. If you look at the last few centuries of human enterprise, slowly it built up towards producing a humongous amount of junk food, making it readily available to everyone, making it extremely easily available to everyone, in fact making it extremely cheap for everyone to have it. McDonald's, for example. So and how was it countered? With awareness, with consciousness, with enlightenment. We realized that we ought not to be having junk food. We ought to be finding alternatives which are healthy, nutritious, and perhaps just as tasty and delicious as junk food is. So we started looking for the avocado of health food. We started looking for the avocado of culture. We started asking ourselves, if good versus evil, the idea of othering, the narrative of this other who's always the evil, and we are told over and over again, oh, that's the basic parameter, that's a basic paradigm of all stories. We started asking ourselves, no, that's not true. We don't necessarily think that of the world. We don't think the world, and and there is sufficient evidence that people who are doing the most horrible actions, who are carrying out the most horrible actions on humanity, the most horrendous, abhorrible actions on humanity, are absolutely convinced of their goodness. Then not for a moment are they thinking that they are the evil. So we know that there is something fundamentally wrong about that narrative. That narrative is like strawberry cheesecake. It's sugar. It's spreading like diabetes around the world. And how do we counter it? How do we make the health food of culture? How do we invent the avocado of narrative ecosystems?
So we came to the how of things, and the how of things we realized that whenever there has been an inflection point in society or an inflection point in enlightenment, it has needed a vessel to carry itself to everyone. We are the privileged. We understand things that perhaps only the 1% of humanity understands. How do we take this to everyone and perhaps push consciousness or one step higher? And whenever this has happened, it's required a story of a monumental scale that is very similar to the world we live in, but just removed enough so that we can look at it from the outside and say, okay, that is what we aspire to. That is what the world that should be. These stories are called mythologies. We have crafted mythologies every time we have needed to tell a civilization that that's the aspirational world you need to build towards, and that's the aspirational world, so uh, the dystopic world you want to be away from. So we said, why don't we craft a mythology, a non-dogmatic mythology that evolves with everyone in part, takes everyone along, and builds a shared narrative that we can all inhabit, we can all ponder over, and through this narrative, critique, understand, analyze the world we live in and the stories we tell.
And just to add to what you said, the greatest human ability, the ability that is very specific to humans. I mean, there are a lot of we as a species we have this ability of constantly self-correcting, and in our ambition of self-correction, we also self-critique sufficiently. We constantly nitpick about what our consciousness does and what it doesn't do. We talk about how as a species we have constantly failed this planet, and that's a great discourse to participate in because that allows us to constantly course correct. But we also ought to remember what other abilities that we have that are unique to us, and one of that ability is foresight, the ability to look into the future. Just by sitting here, we can sit here and dream up multiple futures and simulate those futures in profound detail. To the best of our knowledge, we are the only species that can do it with that degree of complexity. Other species, we know through whatever neurological data that we have access to and whatever evolutionary data that we have access to, we know we can probably speculate that the other species don't have the ability as advanced as we do in to predict the future, to be able to look into the future or dream of futures in our heads. So the greatest human ability is foresight, and the engine of foresight is hindsight. We are able to imagine and dream of futures based on histories, based on the past data, based on the data that we have collected and accumulated over centuries and millennia of learning. And we deploy all this information and knowledge towards predicting the future to the best of our abilities. And then we present these futures to each other. We say, hey, how about a world where everyone is equal? Because that's not what we came from. Nature, there is no equality. In nature, there is no equity. So humans come together and say, hey, but can we possibly imagine a future where even if you are genetically weaker or genetically not best suited for that particular environment, you'll still have abilities, you'll still be given abilities by infrastructure that will give you an opportunity at dignity, that will give everyone an opportunity at life. So these are human concepts, these are human inventions that we build, not by inheriting values of the past, but by reverse engineering values from the future we seek to build. So we can sit together and negotiate these futures, we can dream up these futures, and we can make extremely nightmarish scenarios of the future. We can scare each other with anxiety laden nightmares so that we can avoid the pitfalls that we are very likely and vulnerable to fall into. And we can dream up futures that are not natural, that are not inherent to nature, but we can probably invent and produce. And then we can reverse engineer the steps required to make these futures come true, futures of equity, of liberty, of equality, of non-predatory existence, of a non-violent existence. We can dream up multiple kinds of futures, multiple values, and reverse engineer the steps. Now the steps are what we call values. When we talk about values, we often think of values inherited from past, but values are inherited from the future. You reverse engineer the future you want to build, and those steps required to make the future come true is what you call your set of values. So we said, can we create a new set of values based on the future that we seem to be wanting to build as a civilization?
And on that note, we realize that when two people sit down in a room and create values, our values will be limited, will be bottlenecked by only what we can imagine or only the worldview that we see. So the only way of changing the narrative, of changing the hypotheses, is by changing the narrator. And we said, perhaps the need for the hour is not two authors sitting in a room and imagining a future in their very, very limited capacities, but perhaps it is in creating a shared mythology that all of you can come in and inhabit, where all of you can bring your perspectives, your worldviews, and debate, critique, analyze. the world that we want to live in. Anand, why don't you tell them a little more about what the ambition here is?
So very quickly, we'll just very quickly also mention what we do out, like how we usually express our work. We make films and games. I just want to do a quick sense of
Hands,
the
yeah.
room so that we understand the audience we are talking to. How many of you have seen or experienced any of our work?
Okay,
Or
show of hands. Ship of Theseus. Okay. Tumbad.
more
Okay.
for Tumbad?
More for Tumbad, yes. An Insignificant Man.
Oh wow, some
Okay.
insignificant man watches.
While we watched
Shasan.
Shasan. Okay.
Oh, Shasan has it. I'm surprised. I thought okay, there's a lot more young people. So I thought Shasan, the board game. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we'll play that. Okay, so okay, fantastic. Okay, so we like when Zain started, Zain talked about how we stepped back, and after producing all this work, after making all these films and games, we took a step back and we started asking ourselves this question that demanded some degree of intellectual honesty from us. That asked that where we asked about our impact, because it would have been, we realized that it would be we would have not necessarily lived our full potential as privileged individuals who have been granted this ability to take on this task of sharing enlightenment that we have received with others. And we would not do a great job of it if we 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we were to look back at our lives and say, oh, we made a bunch of films and we made a bunch of games and they were very well received in the world. It would not necessarily be a very good use of the privilege that we have. So we decided to ask this question of it, and we said, okay, we are going to take this head on and try and create something that is full of tools that can impact behavior, that can impact beliefs, that can in fact impact worldviews, that can stay agile, that can be updated constantly, that doesn't become dogmatic, that has an expiry date in built into it, and that updates and upgrades the errors of all the mythologies of the past that are not speaking to the world that we are trying to build today as a civilization. A story of good versus evil does not speak to the world that we are trying to build. For the world that we are trying to build today, a world that is confronting climate crisis and pandemics and unprecedented disparity between the rich and poor, jobs going away to AI, and whatever this
exactly.
relationship with this new sentience that we are
More
going to have.
importantly, problems that we don't even know are going to hit us tomorrow. How do we even create a framework, a narrative framework for problems that none of us can foresee? We can only hypothesize. 3 years ago, we weren't looking at LLMs, and now we are worried about them taking away all our jobs.
And that's when we decided that we're going to take all this material, synthesize it together, create a framework that is most agile, most updated, most upgraded than ever before, and and translate it into a language that is intuitive. That is the language of felt tip markers. That's the language of sugar, but it does not have sugar in it. It's sugar coated, but it's like a spinach donut or whatever. So I'm like stretching the metaphor to its limit now. So we decided we're going to do that. We're going to have an extremely nutritious, healthy narrative experience that is as delicious, as tasty, and as engaging and immersive as the most as the most seductive experiences that of primitive life are, which is like PUBG, shooting each other's brains off, or courting each other to no end, like romance stories and conquest stories. These appeal to the lizard brain in us. So we said we'll take the grammar of these narratives and create a completely new mythology. So all of this time we have not even begun to talk about what we are actually doing.
Yeah.
This was only a disclaimer, a long 30-minute long disclaimer. This is the world we started building. It's a world, it's a new mythology. It's a new mythology. It's not only a new mythology, it's a new mythological system. It's an entire ecosystem of narrative universes. For the last 3 years, Zain and I, along with a lot of our collaborators from every field, scientists, geologists, evolutionary biologists, cognitive neurobiologists, anthropologists, came together, and we simulated this universe, simulated an entire, we really went on this crazy, super ambitious world building project where we simulated a new world and when I say simulated, it's not like in VR or anything yet. When I say simulated on paper, really like sitting together and thinking about
Because
it.
what we realized was if I were to sit down here and tell you about the world's problems, tell you about how a few companies are running the military complex, tell you about the Israel-Palestine war, very few takers for that. When we are close to the problem, we realize the problem is not very consumable. So we said, what if we take the same problems, mimic them, copy them, to as much accuracy as we can, but set it on a land far, far away that has nothing to do with the land that we come from.
And also, abstraction makes it easy. The metaphor is the cornerstone of human cognition. We have this incredible ability as humans to synthesize multiple problems that repeat themselves over and over again, group them together, and create an abstract value for that. And that becomes very easy for us to understand and grasp. Um, you can One can get really lost in the nuances of who started the war first when there is a war going on. You can get lost in narratives of uh, of who to blame, what the solutions look like, whether a two-state solution is the right solution or not. You can get lost in a lot of this nuance. But through abstraction, we always have the ability to step back and then inform our policy decisions, then inform our democratic decisions, then inform what the world could look like. So we decided to create this abstraction. We created this extremely complex world.
Yeah. So the question was, how do you make something from scratch? And Carl Sagan gave us enlightenment over there. He starts Cosmos by saying, how do you make an apple pie from scratch? Well, the person on the other end responds, well, by taking an apple, to which Sagan interjects, saying, no, how do you get an apple from scratch? From an apple tree. No, how do you get an apple tree from scratch? And he went all the way back to saying, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, first you start by making a universe. And that's exactly what we did. For 3 years, we sat down with geologists, evolutionary biologists, historians, anthropologists, uh, economists, and started building a new universe. A universe that's very similar to our universe, but entirely different.
And the metaphors within the universe, the allegories within the universe are so agile that we do now feel that various communities in the world, various groups in the world, various individuals in the world will identify with a wide variety of these allegories, a wide variety of these metaphors, and hopefully in that mirroring exercise, in that paralleling exercise, also find within that prescriptions, solutions, possibilities, or have solutions that they can weave within these metaphors. So now we have this entire world with various species, various community, various histories. We have simulated an entire history for this world, millions of years of history, thousands of characters. We are done writing. We're done writing about hundreds of characters full-fledgedly within the universe. We have so far finished making. So we just finished writing the first novel that is going to come out of the universe. We finished making the first two board games, tabletop games that will come out of the universe. We've started making the film from this narrative universe, and that's only the first couple of things that Zain and I, as authors, are manifesting from the universe.
And
but it's
that
a
is
shared world.
Yeah, it's only for setting the tone. It's only to get all of you inside the universe and set the tone of the rules of the world, of the characters, of the conflicts of the world. The ambition is not these books. The ambition is not these games. The ambition is a shared, like we keep saying, a shared mythology. What we imagine in the next 5 years, you'll be able to go online, write your own Maya story, monetize your own Maya story, create characters, borrow characters from other people written it, and tell your own story to perhaps hundreds of millions of people who understand this universe worldwide. Imagine if the Mahabharata, the Star Wars, Lord of the Rings could be written by all of us simultaneously. That is the ambition we think is the bridge between what we want to be and where we want to go.
So the greatest success that we can imagine for our world, for Maya, is that 15 years from now, or 20 or 30 years from now, the greatest films, the greatest books, the greatest novels that come out of this universe are not the ones that we have written or created.
Or perhaps the ones that we don't agree with even.
Yeah.
Because the universe has moved, the world has moved on to ideas far more equitable, far more, what do you call it?
Sophisticated even.
Sophisticated, leaving us obsolete. That is truly the ambition.
So thank you so much for that. That's
That's the intro to the world. Stay tuned. January is when the first book launches, followed by the first game. If you have any questions, any thoughts, any retorts, please. Hello.
Hi, so Sudhina here. So the other day I was playing Shasan and I remember screaming to my co-player saying that, you know what, I don't want trust anymore. Yeah, so I don't have friends anymore. I have just frenemies by playing Shasan. So, so I was wondering, like, from playing the game for like 3, 4 times, what I've realized is that whatever the political leaders are telling us, it's not their ideology essentially. It's just the reflection of what the public thinks or what the public actually wants. So I was just wondering, like the question is to you, Zain, Memon, like, is that the real enlightenment we as players are supposed to get from it, or is there something more complex in it?
If one politician was corrupt, if there was one outlier politician who was corrupt in one particular party, in one particular country, perhaps we could blame the politician entirely. But we have been hearing stories about corruptible, despicable people becoming politicians for as long as democracy has existed. So perhaps the problem lies not in the individual, but the system that attracts or creates a particular kind of individual. Perhaps we need to question the system, question the incentive structures, and question the entire nature of decision of collective decision making. That's exactly what the game tries to tell you. That perhaps it's not the individuals, perhaps it's the individuals that are being attracted by a particular system.
And I mean, of course, the solutions are multifold, and that kind of becomes visible in the board to some extent, like you rightly pointed out. The sociological, psychological aspect that informs the policy promises is given by the population. The cards are the population, right? The number cards, the voter cards are the population, and the population already has a sociological belief system, as a worldview that the policy makers are informing, the policy makers are responding to, and hence this loop of and the impossibility of finding the culprit in that system. We can say the system, but what does that system mean when you start breaking it down? We're talking about democratic reforms. We're talking about completely doing away with hierarchies altogether. We're talking about highly decentralized systems of decision making. We're talking about not leaving the decision making to only a few representatives, but expanding the scope of decision making with in a post blockchain, post AI world. We can decentralize decision making to and have these decision making solutions that can be extremely agile and are not dependent on this 5,000-year-old technology of choosing one person for 5 years and depending on them. So there are lots and lots of solutions that we are hoping that the game inspires and talks about by just observing the challenges within the system.
Like, think about this. Let's say in a particular country, there are 60% progressive people and 40% conservative. And two of us are standing for elections, and we both agree to progressive ideals. So we start wooing the progressive voter. He gets 30%, I get 30%, a total 60% of the progressive vote. Someone else stands up and says, I'm just going to go conservative on this one. They, by just the virtue of being alone on that side, have attracted more people than either of us solo. Now, what has happened is the minority, which is conservative, is in power. We see behavior like this in political systems all the time because our political systems are very, very archaic. We need to, I don't have the answers, but I have the right, I perhaps have a sense of the question that we need to relook collective decision making on the whole.
Yeah. Shasan alone can like get us to talk about for hours. There is just so much. And Shasan, by the way, was a response to An
Failing
Insignificant
campaign, yeah.
Man. We'd made An Insignificant Man. Khushbu and Vinay wanted the conversation about democratic reforms to continue. And that's how Zain started making Shasan. It was going to be just a small game on the DVD back cover of An Insignificant Man. We played the game, it blew our minds. We were like, okay, this is a thing by itself. This is an artifact by itself.
And for those who haven't played it, 6 p.m. today at Taj Gateway.
6 p.m. Taj
Gateway.
the
Yeah.
Gateway Hotel, 6 p.m. We are going to be playing Shasan. Please come. This game, that sounds like gibberish to a lot of people here, and
It's
only
a nice emotional, the emotion being anger experience.
and and the game has no ageism. It's not only for under 30. It's like for everyone. So
Yeah.
please do come.
Hello.
Hello, sir. I'm a student. I have studied, I have done researches on both of you, especially Ayush, and on the game Shasan and Azadi too. So, what my curiosity is, you talked about junk culture and this avocado culture. When everyone has their own definition for what is good and evil, how can we find the avocado? Like, when there is only a uniform definition for what is good for me, then only we can implement something like a good culture.
Yeah.
So how do you try to implement that kind of avocado culture in our society?
I think uniformity or everyone agreeing on the same thing is more detrimental than good. But Anand, you want to take this one?
Yeah. So uh, a lot of what we know is quite objective. Not everything is so subjectively driven. In fact, a large part of human experience is actually quite quantifiable. Even though we may seem to be so different, we are barely different from each other. Think about it from the lens of an alien anthropologist from Mars looking at us and looking at us like any other species. Can you tell the difference between two sparrows? Rarely. Likewise, there is the difference between two humans is actually quite minuscule. What do we want to create for humans? We have come from a world of forest. If you look in the forest, Zain gave a very beautiful example a couple of hours ago, that if you're walking down a forest route, if you're walking down a path in the woods, and you hear this beautiful sound, these beautiful sounds of birds and animals tittering and constantly rustling and howling, and these beautiful forest sounds, you're essentially hearing sounds of birds and animals asking to have sex with each other or kill each other. The life in forest, we as humans evolved out of the forest. As we moved away from forest life, we started looking at the forest we have a prerogative word for that. We call it jungle raj. Jungle raj is the world where there is no civility, where there is no equality, where there is no certainty. If your femur bone is broken, like Margaret Mead says, if your bone is broken, you are left to die. In all other species, it's only with humans that we have the ability to foresee a future, talk about certainty, talk about equality. In fact, not only talk about equality, to a large degree in many societies, actually implement equality. So, to have empathy at an individual level, elephants may have empathy, termites may have hard coded empathy because there are soldier termites who will die for the other species, and so on and so forth. But and humans as individuals may feel very, very sad when they look at the pain of another individual human, right? But we can take it further. What can we do? There is empathy means you look at an old woman who can't cross the street, you hold her hand and help her cross the street. That's empathy. But humans can go much further than that. Humans can go so much further that they will build slopes in all public institutions so that old women are not reliant on your empathy in that moment. What if you don't have empathy in that moment? What if you are an individual without that time or empathy? So we create slopes so that those amongst us who cannot fend for themselves have infrastructure fending for them. Now that's an example of systems empathy. So these are objective goals that we can come upon with as a species. And these objective goals can be agreed upon and identified very easily. In fact, have been agreed upon. There is such a thing as, in fact, these are so clear that they are listed. If you go online, you'll find 16 goals that United Nations has already given out. If we just fulfill these 16 goals, it's enough. They are very objective. We don't need to debate them anymore. You don't have to debate whether a female should have right to participate in collective decision making or not. It's not a decision to be discussed anymore. You know what I mean? Don't need to debate whether or not a child should have the right on their own life, and should anybody else have the right to bomb the child within certain contexts. You don't have to debate that anymore. These are objective goals that we can arrive upon as a civilization and agree upon, and we have already agreed upon them. And we can reverse engineer the methods that these objective goals will become a reality. These methods is what you call values.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi.
Lovely session. Love the work you guys do. We
Thank
know
you,
this
Roshan.
already. It's very comforting to see people applying themselves to the problems of the world, which we all usually talk about and then put aside and go to bed. But I was just thinking, the mythological stories we have now, you know how there are different perspectives of it, different versions of it. So part of my question has sort of been asked already. And we've seen these same stories being appropriated for some of the most purest acts of kindness and the most horrible acts of violence around us. So in this new reverse engineered value system and the new myth that you're creating, how do you foolproof that? How do you
I want to take on that because there is one point that I wanted to make earlier.
Sure,
Also,
okay.
Because see, it's a sleight of hand, Roshan, of guardians of mythological systems who say that the problem is not within the text, the problem is in the interpretation. The problem is not in the interpretation, the problem is within the text most often. That's the key answer to that question. That more often than not, there is no problem in interpretation. It's the moderate that helps the extremist. The moderates who want to like just move around this comfort of keeping their value systems, keeping their privilege, keeping their birth, their identity. They say, oh, the text is people who are doing this, people who are committing violence, people who are committing violence in the name of religion, they are the outliers. But if you look at the text is prescribing that violence. In fact, people who are moderates are the outliers. The interpreters are the outliers.
And,
But
and
there are so many, so they can just like help each other in saying, no, this is an interpretation problem. The text is not problem. The text is problematic more often than not. So first is that we don't have a problematic text to begin with. Secondly,
and any idea that says that I cannot be questioned, I cannot be challenged, and I will never evolve is a bad idea. Anything dogmatic that says that this is the final truth and any examination of this truth is blasphemous, is a bad idea. We must, as a society, always question everything, every idea, and keep arriving on newer and better truths. There's no absolute truth. So as long as some organized structure allows you to do that, by all means, but very few do, if any at all.
also we have the privilege of being able to say this and do this because we come 2000 years after these experiments have been done. So there is this
You
beautiful
still have to. You still have. Sorry, it's still me. But you still have to raise yourself to the point of God to be able to say that this is correct. You know, this is right. Or this is the only right way to read it. Or there is only a right way to read it.
There is the constitution, there are the courts, there are other ways that we have of collectively agreeing on what is right without invoking holiness.
we ask this of Maitreya all the time, right? Like he on simultaneously he breaks down authority and also is an authority on so many ideas. Like pretty much every time we meet Maitreya, he baffles us and he gives us a new way of thinking about something that we were so certain of. And we think that we are agile intellectuals. We are intellectually honest and we keep questioning ourselves. Even with that agility, he comes and challenges us every time and we go like, oh yeah, it didn't occur to us that time. So, and at the same time, so he decimates authority and is an authority at the same time. And we have kind of tried to make him into an algorithm now into the literature to some extent, to some degree of success as well.
There's someone, can you have mic over here, please? The second row. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I have not been seen your projects, nor have been read or heard about it. I'm hearing you for the first time. So excuse me if I am wrong in my thought process of understanding it. But some of the thoughts that you shared, one of them which has been clearly articulated, and I like the idea, great. But always, whether in mythology or in today, there is a huge difference between right and wrong. Anybody who rules the wrong also believes that he is right. And he has certain reasons why he is doing right. Now, when you are interpreting a world like that, just giving an example, I think no other things, Kauravas and Pandavas, Duryodhana was right, he felt it was his right till the end, till he died. Today we push him and show him as a bad character. He's not something to be followed with, but living his life, being in his station. Every day in our society, in our life, in our neighbors, in our places, we find these characters and they are all right in that manner. When we are trying to find an ideal world, that is something utopian. That's one of the feeling. Second thought is when we have a right and wrong, and that is only when we find that different shades of it, as well as find the way what you said, nothing is black and white, more are on the gray. It's true, because then only we know what is dark, what is light, and what is gray. So when we are creating a world of such parameters that you are defining, it's very difficult for me to perceive it until I read more about you, but this is my confusion I have.
It's kind of, I mean, I don't know if we were very clear. We speak very fast sometimes, Zain and I.
Especially
so,
me.
So might have kind of missed what we said. But that's really all we spoke about right now. That firstly, we are not proposing that there is no such thing as right and wrong and everything is gray. In fact, we are saying the exact opposite. We are saying there is such a thing as right and wrong, but it's not inherited from the past. It's built from the value system of right and wrong. What we call right and what we call wrong is derived from the future that we seek to build. If we seek to build a certain future, the methods, the engineering required to build that bridge to the future is what we call right or wrong. Some behaviors, some policies, some collective decisions will lead us to the future, and some will lead us away from it, lead us astray from it. The, the, the behaviors that lead us astray from that beautiful future that we can imagine collectively is wrong. The things that can lead us to that future is what we call right. So that's how we define right and wrong. Secondly, we did talk about interpretation, and in fact, being very wary of interpretive interpretive uh, challenges, and that's why we are more prescriptive. In fact, we are so didactic that we get a lot of flack for that. Like, I don't, you haven't seen our films, but Ship of Theseus, Shasan, Tumbad, they're extremely didactic. There is no room for interpretation. We have said exactly what we want to say, leaving absolutely no space for interpretation or wandering about. So we are very, very didactic in.
Yeah, but having said that, when you read a novel, you notice a character, I won't give spoilers, who's one of the bad guys. But when you do read a graphic novel, you will realize a different perspective. We won't be lying to you as an audience. We'll be giving you their perspective of the story and perhaps convince you that a more well-rounded, a more multifaceted view of characters and their worldviews can perhaps create a richer understanding of the world they live in and the world they come from.
There's this one gorgeous metaphor that always comes to my mind that I really love so much, by Buckminster Fuller. He was asked very often if what would it be like to be aboard a spaceship, and he would often say that, well, we know what it's like to be aboard a spaceship. We are on board a spaceship, on spaceship Earth. The only difference is that this little tiny minuscule spaceship, which is like 8,000 miles in diameter and revolves around the mothership sun at 60,000 miles an hour. This little tiny little pebble in the vastness of space. There is one thing remarkable about this spaceship that is different from the spaceships that we have built, that no instruction manual came with it. If you were to be on the crew of a small spaceship 1 million the size of planet Earth, you'd have to train for 15 years of your life. But on spaceship Earth, you just pop, and here you are without an instruction manual. And then suddenly there are these old instruction manuals created 2,000, 5,000, 3,000 years ago for a time that was completely different from ours. They're lining up outside the child that has just popped on this planet, saying, buy our instruction manual here. They will leave it in hotel rooms and they will leave it behind for you for free. They will try to induct you the moment you are warm and hot, and you will have this instruction manual that you live by just by accident of birth or accident of the first instruction manual that got to you. For the rest of your life, you will follow the instructions written in them. Now, the question that we asked was, can we write an instruction manual that is constantly updated, that is constantly agile, that is already extremely updated than all the other instruction manuals of the past, and that is not reliant on us as authority, that is constantly changing, ever evolving, and that's hopefully and probably what we have managed to start, at least if we have not finished it yet. Yeah, please.
One over there.
I'm an educator. Sorry, I'll tone it down. I'm an educator and I try to gamify education for kids, and I've been trying to do that for a long time. And the problem with games is it's very domain specific, and human beings are very domain specific. If they play Monopoly, they're going to be good at Monopoly. Can you transfer that skill to them being good businessmen? That's a question that I think is hard to answer. If if he plays chess well, does he become a good general? I don't think so. That's the one challenge I see with the game. I do believe that the myth has to be reprogrammed, probably at some level. We will benefit from myth reprogramming, but can a game do that to the extent where a human being can be non-domain specific? It's going to be quite challenging. That's the one counterpoint I have.
I largely agree with you. Just one small thing, and it's going to be very short because we really have to vacate the stage. I don't agree with that old adage which says, teach a man to fish and he'll be fine. Teach a man to fish and he'll die in the desert. Teach a person how to learn. It's as simple as that. And if your games, if your ideas, if your stories can teach people how to question things, how to learn, then they will not need to come to me to become a good general or come to me to learn to understand business. They'll learn it on their own. So I think the first thing you need to teach people is teaching them how to learn. That is it. Everything else, they'll have better answers than I do.